By the end of this video, you will have learned how to use the rendering settings in Unreal Engine 5, master it so that you can render both in Lumen and Pathtracing, so that you can come up with images that look like this or this. And also, that was just Lumen. You can even do Pathtracing. So let's get started.
What is up, beautiful people? You guys did it. This is the final episode of Unreal Engine tutorial series. Faraz, great job. Great job to you guys who made it all the way till here.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about render settings.
This is like going to war. Imagine if you were in war, you would have your comrades, everyone's happy in the beginning, and then by the end of the war, half of them are dead, and you have only a few buddies left. And that is the viewers watching right now. Literally, the guys who have survived the war. But seriously, the fact that you guys are here means you guys are serious about this, and that means a lot to us. So thank you for watching and supporting the tutorial series up until this moment. Just want to ask you guys for one favor. Please, if you liked it so far, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and also share it with your friends.
Yes, this is the only way to support us because we provide this for you guys for free.
Absolutely free. So what are we going to do right now?
Let's go render the two scenes that we just created.
Absolutely. So in order to render, there's a couple of things that we'd like to do before we go ahead and do the final stage of rendering. And I want to show you guys all of that so that you guys have learned every single thing that we do in order to get our renders to look beautiful. So the very first thing is, if you remember, we have used two console commands during the entire project, right? And those two were used for the ugly shadows that were caused by the nanite fallback mesh, and also the fact that we had ray tracing culling when we went too far away from the characters. Right now, these are fixed, but every single time you open up your project, you have to reset them and fix them again. There's a way to fix that, and we want to show you guys that so it's easier for you across the board. In order to do that, we're going to go to Window, and then there's this option called Console Variables. If you click that, you can see the two console variables that we have changed and adjusted, right? And their values are updated. You can go ahead and save these as a preset. So we're going to do that right now. Save preset as. Maybe you can open up a new folder for them, call them Console Variables, and then call it
Star Wars?
Yes, Star Wars, whatever. And then now, I'm going to close this. Every single time I open the project again, I don't have to go ahead and manually place them in the console command section at the bottom. I can just go ahead to my console variables and load this up, and it is going to be available for me to use. And it's just going to work like that, right? Simple. All of them are going to be enabled at one go. So this is just a way to make your scene building much quicker before you go ahead and finalize everything. Usually we like to do this in the beginning of the project as well. Now the next tip I want to give you guys, it has to do with lighting. We didn't talk about this earlier on, and we probably won't see the difference right now, but it comes really handy in a lot of different projects. Lighting itself, like each light itself, has a quality, and we can see the quality by hitting on any of our light sources and then searching in the details panel for samples. So samples per pixel is what we're looking for. Currently it's at 1. By default, it's at 1. But then you can go ahead and increase the samples per pixel for each light. Now, mind you, this is gonna hit your performance.
Is this the setup for when the light is flickering during a render?
Yes. So one time when we were working on a project with metahumans, the digital avatars, the shadows were not perfect. And also we had some light flickering in the background. We can't say the word flickering for some reason today. But in order to fix that, all we had to do was increase the samples of the lights. And if you actually go to some of the Epic Games' own sample projects, which is what we told you guys in the very beginning of this tutorial series, and you go ahead and click on some of the lights in the scene, you'll realize that they've changed some of the samples to 3, sometimes to 4, sometimes to 5, and that helps increase the quality of the light and the shadows. This comes in very handy, so make sure you play with these values. You might not see the difference here, but in some other scenes, you might see a drastic change. So that's another tip for you. Now, the final tip before we go ahead and actually start rendering is, we told you guys in the last chapter, but per shot, we recommend you to go ahead and change your lighting so that you can create really cool effects. For instance, let's go to our second camera, okay? We can go here, and as you see, everything is really white, right? So we can go ahead and say, okay, you know what? For this shot specifically, okay, I want to go ahead and drop in a rectangular light in the front, and I want to turn this to the color red, right? So that I have some nice red shining towards my stormtroopers. Now, this might look really bad right now because I'm really not spending a lot of time on this. I'm going to make this a bit wider. Okay. Let's just go into our cameras and see what this looks like. Okay. All right. I'm going to increase this value. You see that? So it's just a little change, right? I'm going to make this maybe 500. It might be because when the door of the spaceship is opening, right, there are red lights there that you want to place later. So now when this shot happens, you'll see the red light shine on them. And that could be accompanied by the sound effect of the door opening. So before you even switch to the other shot, you'll see the red light and then you hear that. Get it? That was a good sound effect,
that was a good sound effect.
Thank you. So that's why we recommend you change the light and see how cool it looks, okay? We're not going to do that right now. This was just a sample for you to see. Now we are going to go straight into rendering. So our very first question in the last chapter was, what is the camera cut track at the top that automatically appears when we bring in a new camera? Now that is basically saying that I want you from frame 0 to frame, whatever that is, 550, focus on the first camera, Cine Camera Actor. You're not rendering anything from the second camera or any other camera that might be in the scene. So how do we go ahead and fix that? Let's say we want to go ahead and render this one shot, but I want all the cameras to change depending on whichever frame it is. And so...
Is that the plus button there?
Absolutely. So there's a plus button right here. And one thing that you can do to check it, by the way, and make sure you're seeing it through the camera cut is if I go to my main camera, my first camera, and I scrub through, this is what I have. If I go to my second camera and I scrub through, this is my shot. And then I can go to my camera cut, which is exactly what is going to be rendered, right? This is exactly what we're going to see when we hit render. We only have the first camera.
So the camera cut at this moment equal to Cine Camera number 1?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
how
now,
can we change it halfway to go to Cine Camera number 2?
Very good question. So we're going to go ahead and use this add button. And we're going to say, okay, I want you to go ahead and add the Cine Camera Actor 2. And wherever my marker was, it's going to change. So now if you look closely at the top left here, and I can just hover over it, it says from frame 124 to 548, for 424 frames, we have the second camera. And then, check this out. I'll go all the way back. Again, make sure you are locked into this icon right here for the camera cut. This is precisely what you will render out. So you go from 0, scrub through, look at what happens. Boom.
Ooh.
You made that switch.
Can we drag and extend our first camera?
Yes, you can do that.
Yes.
You can do that.
Amazing.
And you can basically bring in 100 different cameras and switch them at every single frame. That's up to you. You just have to make sure to add them here. Now, the reason why this is so important, because for beginners, usually they'll add all these cameras and then they'll render. They realize they only have one camera in the render. They forget that they have to change this right here. And what's really neat about locking yourself to the camera cut, when you come up here, you cannot move your camera. So I'm trying to move. Because it's locked with both cameras now, it doesn't allow you to move the cameras. Now, I'm going to give you another tip at the end here. If I go to my first camera right here, and I'll try to move it, look at what happens. I can't actually move it, which is not good. I'm already done with my renders. I want to lock my cameras, even if I'm not locked into the camera cut track. How do I do it? Well, you're gonna go to your cameras, any camera that you want to lock. Once you're done with the positioning, right click, and then edit. Okay, it's not there. I'm gonna go out of it. Let me try again. Right click, okay, doesn't work. Because right now, we want to lock our camera and it doesn't lock. And this actually happens. We wanted to go ahead and erase this part, but you're going to face the same freaking problem. For some reason, sometimes you want to lock your camera. There are supposed to be more options when you right click on it and it's not there. My only solution to this is restart your project. So let's go ahead and do that.
We are back in the engine, going to the level, load the sequencer. Let's see.
Okay, so we're back in the sequencer. All right, now I'm going to go to my cameras and check this out. Right click, and now I have all these options. So I'm going to go to transform and then lock actor movement. I'll do the same thing for my second camera. Transform, lock actor movement. Right now, even if I'm not inside this camera cut track, I can go to my camera 2 and I'm trying to right click. I cannot move the camera anymore, which is perfect because sometimes you might mess up your camera angles and it's the worst thing ever. So we're going to go back to camera cut track. We've got the perfect shot, this shot, and then we want to switch to this guy. Maybe I'll just extend this a little bit more.
And I think
Boom.
300 frame is enough. We don't need all the way.
Okay, so you can either go ahead and say, I'm gonna close this at 300 frames here, or you can actually define the range in the render settings. So now we know this way. Let's just show you the way that happens within the render engine. One final thing I'd like to mention here before we go to actually rendering. Right now we're rendering at 30 frames per second. You can change this again in the render setting, but for you to understand, it's all the way up here. You have options for all of these different frames. You've got 12 FPS all the way up to 240 or your own custom FPS. Another option I really like is down here, show time as. So right now we're seeing everything in frames. Let's say you're working on a music video and you want to see actual seconds. You can just change the show time as to seconds and you'll see right now, Control Z, it's switched to 0 seconds, 4, these are actual seconds, right? And if you change the FPS, you can see that it still keeps everything the same for you to make it simpler. We were on 30 right now, so we're gonna go back to 30 and then show time as frames. Cool. So now it's time to
render.
Baby, let's do it. Okay, so we're gonna go to this button right here. This is what you're looking for, okay? Everything's not saved yet, so let's go ahead and save before we go to render. And then we're gonna go to this button and hit it. We're gonna be presented with the movie render queue. So don't be intimidated by the number of options you've got here. What you're trying to look for is the settings right here. So the way you can actually change your render settings is here. It says unsaved config. That's what you wanna go ahead and press. When you do, you have to make sure you get familiar with this menu right here. This is gonna be your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, whatever it is, you're gonna be marrying this guy right here, okay? You're gonna be rendering
this is
so
the
many
part that
times.
you need, yeah.
This is the most important part, right? So what happens exactly in this section? On the left side, we're looking at different options. We can control the number of different options that we have. And there's so many different things we can choose from. And each of these will have their settings on the right side as soon as we click on them. So as you can see right now on the export section, we are exporting in JPEG, which sucks. You can only do this if you're testing your renders. Then we got the rendering, which is deferred rendering, which is basically saying render in Lumen, the current render that we have, which is basically going to be your rendering setting for the majority of your projects, unless you go for path tracing, which we will show you also in a moment. And then you've got your output, okay? Let's start with the output because this is the one that is going to be common across all projects. This is basically saying, where do you want to save your project? So let's go ahead and do that first. I'm going to go to this output directory, hit these 3 buttons, go to my desktop because I've already prepared a folder, go to renders and go to Lumen. That's the first render that we're doing, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Lumen, select folder. Now for the name, okay? What I always like to do is keep my frame number. So this is a code. It says you go for sequence name, which is right now, what is our sequencer name? Spaceship door opening.
We don't want that.
Yeah.
We just change it to maybe ST and then 001, 002, 003.
So everything before this dot, we're gonna change to ST. Okay, and then it's giving us all these options. Do we want to change it to shot name, blah, blah, blah? No, just keep it ST dot frame number. So ST1, ST2, ST3.
Makes sense.
And then I'm just going to go back here so that drop down goes away. The next thing is output resolution. So it's on
2K?
Yeah, it's on full HD by default right now. We want to change it to
4K.
4K. So you can do this very easily by just taking this value and then multiply. So using the asterisk by 2. Okay, and then here, I'm going to multiply it by 2 as well. And that's how you turn your resolution to 4K. You can go to 1920 1080. Again, if you're testing things, if your computer is not strong enough, we pretty much always go for 4K for our final renders. And then, as you can see, we have 30 FPS. That's our frames per second. You can keep that right now, or you can go ahead and override that value by clicking this and then changing it here.
Okay.
So it works the same way. It's just overriding it in case you want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it at 30. Now, this is what Farhad was talking about when he said, can we pull the frames from 540? That's too much. So how can we do that? We're going to use custom playback range. Farhad, what is the frame that you're looking for?
0 to 300.
0 to 300? Okay. So we have the frame start, custom start frame at 0, custom end frame at
300.
300.
Boom.
Cool. So all of this should be pretty simple. Your directory, where do you want to save? What's the name? What's the resolution? Frame rate? and your custom frame range. You can uncheck this if you've already selected the right frame range in the beginning. And now it's time to change the settings. Farhad, you ready?
I don't like JPEG.
I don't like JPEG either. So
Kick it out.
We're going to kick it out. We can actually go ahead and delete this using backspace. And then in the top settings here, just like our add track, it's the same thing. We have all these options. So for the settings, we have these options. For the exports, we have these options. And for the renders, we have these. So for these settings, you're going to be using a bunch of these settings actually for your final renders. And for the exports, I think this is the simplest one to begin with. What format do you want to export in?
PNG?
We just deleted JPEG, which is 8-bit. And PNG is, of course, a little bit higher quality. So usually for our renders that we upload on social media, we go for PNG. But if you talk to any professional artist, they usually would like to go for EXR, which is right here. It's 16-bit. Your color information and the quality of your images will just be so much higher. And also you have a lot more control when you're doing post-processing in softwares like DaVinci Resolve. So first, I'll just show you PNG really quickly. This is how you add PNG. Right Alpha says, do you want transparency layer or not? We technically don't want it. We don't have any transparency, so we turn it off. And you can also go ahead and say, hey, bring in EXR as well. Okay, 16-bit.
So it will render both at the same time?
It will render both. So I recommend, for simplicity, for us, we'll turn off EXR at first because we want to do PNG first. So you can just turn it off. You don't have to delete it. And we have PNG right now. Okay, so we're rendering PNG. Now we're rendering Lumen, and we know our output. Then the next setting that you're going to find really useful is console variables. This guy right here is exactly the same thing at the bottom left, right? And we told you guys something in the beginning. Do you remember what we said?
The presets?
Absolutely. So you can actually go ahead and create your presets and call them here. So if you want to already bring a preset that you've created throughout your project, you can just say, hey, console variable presets, add this, open this up. I already have one called Star Wars. Load that bad boy in. Drop it down. I know what those are. Okay?
Amazing.
So you can actually go ahead and say you'll have two presets. One for during your work where you want lower quality, and you can create one super high quality. You have like everything on ultra settings, and then you call that only for rendering. So your computer can really take its time to render. So now we have our console variable preset from before right here, and we can go ahead and add more to this by using this dropdown. And what I usually like to add is just one single console command, which is called r.ScreenPercentage. Now, what does this do? Well, this basically actually works in your viewport as well. If you go to the top left right here, the 3 bars, you'll look for screen percentage, and you'll notice that right now we're at a current screen percentage of 57%. And that is this exact resolution. Although our screen resolution, my monitor, is 4K. So we're rendering at a lower resolution, but Unreal Engine uses anti-aliasing technology, which is also used in games, to make it look sharper so that we can run with higher frame rate. Now, I can go ahead and make this a different number by using custom override. I can take this to, let's say, 95 or even 100, but my FPS is definitely going to take a hit, which is not good. But for render time,
you can increase it.
Absolutely. And what will that do exactly? So let's go and set this back to normal. Let's go back to our render settings. Let's go back here. Now, screen percentage of 0 is actually really low. We don't want that. 100 will be the normal display, but we usually like to bump this up to 125, 150. Right? Anything more will probably make your computer crash. Basically, this says, I want you to go larger than my screen display and then keep the same resolution, scale it down at the output. What that does, it keeps the resolution the same, but it makes your image sharper. So it's very good to have a sharper image. This is the best simple setup for a Lumen render, right? You can go crazier with this, but really for beginners, this is perfect. So Farhad, shall we render?
Click accept.
Click accept.
And then render local.
Render local. If you have servers that you're rendering on, which you probably don't as a beginner, that's what you're going to go for. We've never done that. We're going to go render local. And let's see the magic. So very quickly, talking about everything that you're seeing here, you're going to see a low quality render preview of what you're going to see as the output. So if you see any mistakes here, usually you want to stop your render by hitting the escape button. And on the left side, you're looking at the total frames and the number of frames and also the time remaining for your renders. We haven't started anything yet. It's going to take some time. But on the right side, you're also going to see the actual frames plus the camera cut track. So right now we're on the first camera. There's 2 of them, of course. And you'll see the switch happen as well. So Farhad, How long do we have remaining for this render?
12 minutes only. Now 10, now 9, now 8,
Now
7.
7.
I'm going to fast forward this until we get to the end of this
Next.
render.
No, I want to go to the next camera cut track. So we'll see you in the next camera cut track.
Okay.
All right, I want to bring you guys back just so you see how freaking fast this is. This is the reason why you're using Unreal Engine 5.
Now the camera cut changed.
Actually, yes. It changed to the second one, right?
Yes.
And we're just going to have a quick pause and it's going to switch. And guys, if you were coming here from Blender or Cinema 4D, you'll notice basically how fast this render is. This is why people switch to Unreal Engine 5, because when we actually go ahead and switch to the path tracing render after this, which is similar to the other 3D softwares, you'll notice small differences. The Lumen render is really close to the path tracing renderer.
So we are done. Let's check the render.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the folder, and I have
look at all
installed
of
this software called DJV. Really recommend it to you guys. Basically, you can view image sequences inside your windows. By right-clicking and dragging, we can see what our render looks like.
Ooh. Run.
Dude, look at this.
Oh, this is so
shit.
good.
Wow.
Honestly, I don't think if your PC cannot handle path tracing, this is more than good enough.
Yes,
This
more
is
than enough.
amazing. Yeah.
Perfect. So this was your Lumen render, rendered in about 4 minutes, which is so freaking fast. We have an RTX 4090, so we understand, but it's very fast.
Hold up! Did you know that you can use photogrammetry to create highly photorealistic scenes by taking what exists in the real world into 3D?
We've been using Polycam to do exactly that using our phone and drone.
That's right, and shout out to them for sponsoring this video, giving you guys 30% off their promo plan.
The promo code is bad.
No, 30% off their plan, not the promo plan. No, they don't have a promo plan. 30% off their plan.
Pro plan.
Pro plan.
Use the code bad decisions in the link in the description.
Let's continue.
And right now we're gonna go to,
Path tracer.
yes,
Go to the setting again.
okay. And
As you mentioned, we're gonna turn off deferred rendering.
yes, because that's the Lumen rendering right
Yes. We're gonna add the setting for path tracer all the way down.
now. Here.
Yes.
Perfect. So for the path tracing, if you want motion blur, you can go ahead and read this. Sometimes I like to leave this on, sometimes off. For this time around, we're going to leave it on. It really depends on your scene. So make sure you do some test renders and check it out. Turn this
And
on.
do we want to change the number of frames? Because I don't think we want to render 300 frames.
No, path tracing takes a lot
Yes.
longer. So we're going to go to the output frame. Maybe let's just start at frame 200 and then go to 203.
Question, if I want to render a single image, I'll just put one single frame, right? Like
Yeah, so-
200 and 201.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Yes, 203, and that's great. So the thing about the path tracing render that you have to understand is that it works with samples. So this is the difference. If you remember our post-process volume chapter, we had a path tracing setting on the right here, and I have it on the screen so that you'll see what I'm talking about. If I switch to the path tracing mode in my viewport, you'll notice that we're running at 200 samples. So the less bright your scene is, the darker your scene, the more samples you're going to need, because in the darker areas, just like in real life with cameras, you're going to have a lot of noise. But the brighter your scene is, you can use less samples. Now, if you have a lot of metallic and shiny surfaces that are even noisy in Lumen renders, then you know that in your path tracing, you have to render with high samples. Now, I don't know the perfect number for your scene, but usually for a final render, you want to go somewhere above 1,000 samples. And that really depends on you and your GPU. But 1,000 samples takes a while to render per frame.
Where do we set that up?
So in viewport, this is where you change the settings. So if I change this to 1, look at how noisy my image is. Right? This renders fast, but it's very noisy. But if I set it to 500, right, you can sort of see, okay, I'm going to let my screen go. I'm not going to touch anything so the loading bar finishes. The reason why you can control this in the viewport is so that you can understand how many samples you need to get a pretty decent photo, but by photo I mean picture, without any noise. This is without any noise at this moment. So actually, I do see some noise on the top left, and that noise is going to change per image, which is not good. So I assume for us, we're going to need somewhere about 1,000 samples for a really clean image. These numbers here don't actually impact your render. You need to change them using the anti-aliasing setting. So we're going to go to unsafe config. We're going to keep all the settings the same, but we're going to go to settings, and we're going to go to anti-aliasing. Now, for anti-aliasing, this is already working in your viewport. You already have something called, I believe, super resolution. So in your settings, project settings, anti-aliasing, what we're running in the viewport is temporal super resolution, which is why we have the 57% screen percentage, but it looks as if it's 100. It's using TSR. For your final render, you want to go ahead and override the anti-aliasing and turn it to none. That is, I've done extensive research on this. It has to be this specific setting. Now, for your samples, it's basically your spatial sample count multiplied by your temporal sample count. So these two numbers together will make up the total sample per pixel. So Farah, if you want to go to 1,000, what number do we want to put?
Maybe 30 times 30.
I believe they have
32
to,
times 32.
Yeah, I believe they have to go to the power of 2, something like this. So like 2, or they have to go to
32,
4,
32.
8, 16, something like that. So 32, 32, what will that be?
900 something.
Okay, so if we go to 32, 32, we'll see the total sample count when we're hitting render, so no worries. Let's just try with that, okay? So I also like to go ahead and disable the screen percentage when it comes to path tracing because it really increases the render time. All right, this seems to be the one we want to go for. Let's go to accept and hit render local. And we're gonna actually see how many samples it's gonna be at the bottom right in a moment. So that's 1,024 samples, which is perfect. Let's see how long this will take.
We're going to fast forward this.
Farah, is this still rendering? Yeah, path tracing. Oh, sorry. Still rendering. Dude, your beard's grown already since we started the render.
You have more white hairs.
Oh my God. And we're only at half of the samples.
Of the first frame.
Of the first frame.
What did you put as a setup?
We were already done with the Lumen render
Yes.
for like 300, 400 frames. So this is why you do not do the path tracing render. Just kidding. Path tracing renders are really great, but you just have to have the patience and the right GPU. I think we'll just render one frame.
Actually, our path tracing renders already.
Let's
Let's go.
done after 5 years.
Wow.
Let's take a look.
Oh, wow.
But
Amazing.
guys, honestly, there's almost no difference between the path tracing render and the Lumen render. We're going to overlay both so you can take a look.
So if you don't have a beefy computer, you can still go with Lumen and you will be fine.
Farhad, I think it's time.
Guys, congratulations. You guys finished the Unreal Engine beginner tutorial series. You are a pro now.
Yes, and you started just a few weeks ago, or maybe just a few days ago, depending on how long it took you to complete this tutorial series. You started as a complete beginner, someone who had no knowledge or little knowledge of Unreal Engine, but now you know so much. So the fact that you made it until this point makes you a freaking pro, and you deserve a round of applause.